Thank you, everyone. I'd like to get started in about 30 seconds, please. It got very quiet. Well, I think the first part of our program was, I wanted to say, very good. I think it was extraordinary because it teased out a lot of important issues that the United States and Greenland together are addressing, but also I think sets an international framework for how we approach research in Greenland writ large on all issues that we'll talk about here later on this afternoon as well. So I want to thank the panelists and the speakers from this morning and for the minister's opening comments. You know, the Arctic has a lot of friends, some because they have been passionate for a long time about the Arctic, some new to the Arctic, some thinking about the future of the Arctic. In terms of the future of the Arctic, I'm very happy that we have our friend and colleague here, Mr. Drew Horn, to speak about efforts from the United States perspective in Greenland. He'll have a broad swath of issues to share with us, but let me introduce Drew this way. He currently serves as special advisor to the Vice President of the United States. I'll just let that one sit there for a moment. We're at an Arctic meeting, and we have someone from the office of the Vice President here speaking about U.S., Greenland, and the Arctic's future. I think that's an extraordinary, extraordinary showing from the United States. Let me tell you a little bit about Drew. Aside from serving the Department of Energy, he's a highly experienced national security leader with extensive management experience in federal service, the private sector, and as an active duty military service. Prior to his role at the Department of Energy and the Vice President's office, he served as a presidential appointed director of Afghanistan policy in the Office of the Secretary of Defense and was instrumental in the design and implementation of the Trump administration's South Asia strategy. He spent 10 years in uniform as a commissioned officer in the United States military, first as a United States Marine and then as a Special Forces officer in the United States Army. He has extensive combat experience in Afghanistan as a commander of direct action commando teams. He successfully completed 3 combat deployments to Afghanistan in Special Forces and 1 in Iraq as a Marine. Drew and I have had long discussions about the future of the Arctic, ways in which the Woodrow Wilson Center and branches of the federal government and friends throughout the Arctic can work together in shaping the future of the Arctic, so it's indeed a pleasure to introduce to the podium Mr. Drew Horn. Drew.
Well, thank you so much for those kind words. To be honest, I am completely humbled and honored to be here, especially when we're talking about such an important issue, such as the Arctic and U.S. Greenland-Danish relations. I guess I want to start off by saying that this is what I see as a long history of friendship that I see strengthening and continuing to grow underneath the lanes, I would say, of scientific research, energy, development, and overall expansion of human potential overall. I am coming, I would say my home, I consider it right now to be beyond the Vice President's office, the Department of Energy, where I came from most recently. And that is what brought me to Greenland on this adventure that I am now partaking on along with all of you. And I would say that it's an experience that has been overwhelmingly positive, and one that has changed my life, I would say, for the better. And if you'll allow me for a second, I'll flash back to some of my extended background and history. So as the kind words preceding me indicated, I spent some time in uniform. And when I was in Special Forces, a big focus of what we did was working with our NATO partner nations. We saw the extended team as essentially a big family working towards the goals of pursuing freedom and happiness for all peoples. And in fact, that is the motto of Special Forces, which I still carry with me to this day, freeing the oppressed. In the spirit of exploration, I would say the United States, Greenland, Denmark, Iceland, all of the nations of the Arctic Council are continuing to work together to find ways to open up doors for positive development in the Arctic, and at the same time bonding together to prevent any sort of conflict or conflict potential from arising in the area. I just want to highlight that because I think it's important as we develop that friendly nations such as ours continue to work together for the benefit of all. and to prevent any sort of conflict or strategical positioning in the Arctic that would take away from the grander, more noble work that we are trying to do there together. So I will wrap up with just saying that I really think that the United States, Greenland, Denmark, and Iceland in particular have a lot of work that will be done together that will be extremely positive, that will open up doors, that will really push humanity itself further forward. And I do want to give a brief plug. The Department of Energy has Secretary Perry, who will be hosting the Arctic Circle Assembly event in Reykjavik on October 10th. And it's an important part of what we're trying to do to open up doors, not just for energy development in all sectors in the Arctic, but also in the realms of scientific research, which we feel there is no bounds. So I would just like to finalize by saying that the United States is an Arctic nation, and that developing a strong, sustainable, and responsible Arctic policy in coordination with all of our partners is an absolute priority. And I would say that the U.S., Greenland, Danish friendship that has continued for so long will only get stronger and bring us forward into this great new future. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew. Now on to the next panel. I will invite my associate, Jack Durkee, to introduce the next panel. Let me say a word about Jack for those of you who don't know them, and I don't know anybody in town who can say the words Arctic and that know Jack Durkee. But Jack simply has helped me create and now run this program over the course of the last year plus, and has been instrumental in not just today, but in all those programs that the Arctic program our Polar Institute runs here. So without further ado, my associate, Mr. Jack Durkee.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Mike just said, I am Jack Durkee. I work with Mike to craft and execute the programs and initiatives of the Wilson Center's Polar Institute. Our next panel today will focus on U.S. perspectives on research in Greenland with representatives from NASA, the U.S. Air Force, the National Science Foundation, and the Center for Astrophysics at Harvard and Smithsonian. These experts will expand upon the perspectives that Mr. Horn just provided us regarding the U.S. interests in and support of research in related efforts in Greenland. Please welcome to the stage the moderator of the next panel, Dr. Jennifer Mercer, who will further explain the unique focus and perspectives of these experts.
Okay, well, we have several speakers, and representing different agencies with different missions, we're brought together here today by our common interest in Greenland and its role in each of our agency's activities. So I've asked each speaker to talk briefly about their agency's research activities in Greenland and Greenland's importance to those activities, as well as any current collaborations, just to highlight those with the Greenlandic research community, or outreach activities that are conducted. And then we'll follow up with some discussion and questions and answers. I know each of our presenters was asked to just do 5 minutes with slides, and they do have presentations for you. So we'll start with, do we have a specific order, Mike? Or not? Whatever you like. Okay. Well, thank you. We'll start with Dr. Thornton Marcus from NASA.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having me. I'm really thrilled about it. I learned a lot this morning, or this afternoon, earlier today. And I want to talk a little bit for 5 minutes. I could talk for hours about our research that we're doing, in and on in Greenland. And that's a picture from Operation Icebridge that flew over Greenland, is flying over Greenland right now, flew over Greenland in April, and we saw a tremendous amount of melt ponding there, which was way earlier than anyone expected. We thought we would still see dry ice conditions. We did not. It was melting, very, very much. If you go to next slide. I guess it's...
Yes, it works. Yep.
So We have at NASA have been studying Greenland for decades now, and we have a very broad science portfolio that we are supporting. We support science on the ground. We send people up to Greenland a lot of times, up to Summit or outside Kangerlussuaq, to do field work, monitoring, the conditions directly there. We have been flying over Greenland since the early 90s, and then extended this with Operation Icebridge more extensively, and I will talk about this in a second. It's a little light. We, of course, we are NASA, so we observe everything from space. So we, Greenland for the Kreisberg program is a big focus point, and I will talk about this as well. And, in order to predict the future, only models can predict the future, so we put a lot of effort into funding modeling efforts to give us a better understanding what the future for Greenland may look like. So this week in Thule, Air Force Base, we had 3 NASA planes up there at the same time, which is very unique. We had one plane which is supporting Operation Icebridge. We had another plane, I will talk about all these missions in a second, supporting oceans melting Greenland. And then we had a third plane with a hyperspectral imager that supports ISAT-2, a recently launched laser altimeter mission. So on the Operation Icebridge, the main instrument on Operation Icebridge is a LiDAR, a laser altimeter that measures the height of everything with great precision. And you can see from the map in the middle how extensively we have mapped over the last 3 decades, really, the Greenland ice sheet. And as a matter of fact, there's a science paper out in 2000, you can see the picture on the right, which was the first paper that actually described or estimated that Greenland is losing mass. Before, we didn't even know that Greenland is losing mass so tremendously. And this is from the airborne data that we started collecting in 1993. And just as a side note, all of our data, all of our NASA's data are freely available to the public. So we are a government agency, and all of our data are available to everyone. It should start. Should be a movie. Does it start? In addition to a laser altimeter, we also have a radar on the plane that is measuring the interior and the history. The movies don't play. It's all movies. Oh, that's going to be interesting.
You could.
I can talk. I can describe movies.
You could do interpretive dance.
I'm not a mime.
Dance movie.
I wish I was more articulate. So, in addition to lasers, we also have radars on the plane that penetrate the 3 kilometers of ice that is on top of the Greenland ice sheet, and we can see all these different layers, annual layers, and we can see the bedrock very clearly as well. And with these layers, we can analyze the history of Greenland, what happened, thousands and thousands of years ago. We can do this with a vantage point from an aircraft. I think I all embedded them.
Ooh, this one's playing.
Oh, this is playing. Oh, great. So we have a satellite in space which is called GRACE. It measures the gravity of the Earth's field. And just give me 1 minute to explain because it's so cool. It's really cool. It's really cool. Normally, we have cameras on satellites that look downwards and measure things. And GRACE, I love the concept. It's like 2 satellites that only look at each other. And they measure the distance between the 2 satellites with the precision of a hair as it orbits around the Earth. And so when the first satellite goes over an area of increased gravity, it just accelerates ever so slightly, until the second satellite is over the same area of increased gravity, and the distance becomes normal again. Can you imagine those satellites fly around 90 minutes around the Earth, and they can measure the distance between themselves with the precision of a hair? And so we can measure the mass of the Greenland ice sheet directly. And we can see how much it's losing in mass. We are losing roughly, it says so, 280 gigatons a year. That's a huge, huge number. And that's continuing and it's happening. That's a still image. And then just last year, we launched a satellite called ISAT-2, which is a very high precision laser to measure the height of everything from space. And I can talk for hours about that one. And very recently, we combined those data with an earlier version of ISAT, ISAT-1, which was launched in 2003, and calculated elevation change over this 20-year time period. And in some areas, I don't know whether you can see it, like near Jakobshavn, we are losing roughly 6 meters of elevation a year. Those are huge numbers, very, very huge numbers. We see a little bit of increase in elevation over the interior because of increased snowfall, but at the margins of Greenland, the elevation changes are enormous. And it's supporting the mass loss that we're seeing from Grace.
This is your 1 minute warning.
That's fine.
Okay.
No, that's perfectly fine. And we're doing synergistic measurements as well. We have planes and ships at the same time going around Greenland and measuring the ocean properties as well as the ice properties to better understand the interaction of the ocean with the melting ice sheet, and also the interactions between the impact that Greenland has on the global ocean circulation. If we see increased freshwater fluxes, this will have an impact on the global ocean circulation. And as I said in the beginning, it should play. Does not play. That's a nice movie. Let me explain how it would. Oh, well, nice. Nicely done. Yeah, it's playing. It's playing.
Yeah.
So this goes up to the year 2300. What would happen, to the ice sheet if, we don't decrease carbon emissions at all? This is like in ICCP language, HRP 8.5. If we don't do anything, you can see how dramatically the ice sheet will shrink over the next, couple of hundred years. And lots of data that we are collecting right now go into improving those models to improve our predictions. And I think that's kind of it.
Is that available online, that movie?
This movie is available online,
Okay.
yeah.
Great.
So that's pretty much our portfolio. Oh. Now you expect something really good, right? It's an airplane and it takes these radar measurements and you see how these different, how layered the actual ice sheet is, and you can see like tree rings can measure how much accumulation happened when. And I think at the bottom of this flight is like 90,000 years ago. So you have a very nice time series of what's happening on Greenland. When we fly with Icebridge, we always take Greenlandic researchers or teachers with us. So we have a good relationship for years now when we fly out of Kangerlussuaq to have people along to fly over Greenland, which is, I think, a very unique view. We fly at 1,500 feet, which is 500 meters. And, it's very cool.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right, thanks.
So we're going to hold questions. You can clap. And then we're going to hold questions for the panel. So I'm going to ask the panelists just to either take a seat on the side or along the wall so that we don't block the slides for the next couple of speakers, and then we'll all join the table. So next I will ask Mr. Simon Stevenson to come up.
So given the topic, I was a bit surprised that Jen asked me to do this talk because she should really be doing it. But occasionally they let me out to provide what the panel is discussing, and that's sort of perspective And so I'll give a little bit more perspective. And this was mentioned actually in the first talk this afternoon. The U.S. efforts in Greenland have really been focused on mostly on ice sheet, and it mentioned ice sheet dynamics and ice sheet history, and that's true. So Marcus gave a great update of that perspective, but it goes back to the late mid 1980s. Was sort of both the NASA perspective and the NSF perspective at that time. Most of the research was conducted under the military umbrella, because the big military bases, Kangerlussuaq was then Sandöstrom, and of course Thule. So that was where scientists came in and out, and there was very, very little interaction with anybody in Greenland. But that sort of changed. The Danish Polar Center was an instrument in the Danish government to undergo the permitting that research projects back at that time had to go through, and later a Greenland representative was added to that process. And by the time we got to about 2000, we recognized at NSF that we really wanted to have more of a direct relationship with the civilian side, our civilian counterparts in Denmark and Greenland, and remove ourselves a little bit from the military umbrella, so that there was this sort of beginning of a direct interaction. And that was really the place we were at when the joint agreement between the U.S., Denmark, and Greenland was developed and signed in 2004. So actually, when we got identified by the State Department, NSF, as having this other agreement, we were actually quite worried, because we thought we were maybe perceived as a rogue agreement. But the State Department were delighted, because this was actually in a direction that they wanted to go, to pull out the scientific efforts as something that should be as sort of more of a standalone, I'm not sure if that's the right term, activity for U.S. Greenlandic and Danish relationship. So that'll bring us to the sort of current portfolio. It's still pretty much, which one is forward?
Should be that one.
Oops.
Uh-oh. Not sure. Okay.
And which one's forward?
Here you go.
All right.
I think you're already there.
Yep. So I'm just showing this really to give you a point that we have 50 or so projects each year. The map on the right is what we call a measle map. It just shows the sites where people work. Quite often they're just actually single instruments. This may be actually representative of several years of work. So we're in a lot of places in the Greenland, and so that represents about several hundred researchers going to Greenland each year. And this is just an image of various projects going on actually last year and this year. I won't talk too much about them, but I'll again remind you what the portfolio looks like. So it's ice sheet dynamics, as there was back in the 80s. Ice core work to tell us about the Earth history. A lot of focus now on the ice sheet's interaction with the atmosphere, an important component of the modeling that Marcus took us through. But there's also archaeology. So the folks up there in the hole on the top right-hand side are helping us with a project that's looking actually at the Earth history captured by human beings in the North Atlantic. So there's work in Greenland, there's work in Iceland, there's work in Norway, the Faroe Islands, etc. So this is a project that is an important component. But there are new areas that are developing. Or one, a pilot study we funded recently was on the development of agriculture in the south of Greenland. Another was to use co-production, a term that, again, we heard earlier this afternoon, to look at the history and the development of fast ice. I'm going to probably make this unrecognizable, but most of you won't know, Umanak Bay. And the fast ice is sort of interesting from a scientific point of view in the sense of, ocean circulation, but it's critical for the livelihoods of the people who live and hunt in those regions. So that's the sort of portfolio that we currently have. And this is, again, just a summary. We heard about, in the middle of the slide there, the Joint Science and Education Program earlier, so I won't emphasize that. And there's a series of collaborative efforts that we already have underway. In fact, if you look at our portfolio, about 10 of the projects that we have of the 40 or so are collaborations, some with our own agencies in the US, but 4 or 5 of them were with Danish counterparts, so or Danish and Greenlandic counterparts. So that's what our current portfolio looks like. I'm going to jump a little bit now into sort of a perspective looking forwards, given the history that where we've been. Most of the tight coupling that we've had, as it was mentioned earlier on, is through the social science community, who have this this requirement really to work very closely with the local communities. Even in the archaeological projects, there's a tendency in the Arctic to work very closely with the communities that may have, even now, maybe a 1,000 years after the site was formed, a relationship with the people who live there now. So I think as we think about moving forward, we must regard the building of a partnership or a set of partnerships as a generational issue. This is going to take generations to help Greenland develop capacity for US researchers to know how to find that capacity, to work together, to build the trust that we have talked about already. These are things that don't happen quickly. The Joint Science and Education Project was an immediate outcome of the Joint Committee and the establishment of the Joint Committee in 2004. And at that time, we wanted some quick wins, and that project was a quick win, and it's still with us 11 years later. But most of I think the things that we need to do, we need to think in terms of timeframes of 4 to 5 years. The U.S. government actually is not really well suited for sort of a longer view. We're worried about actually October and whether we will have a budget or not. But I think that's the framework we need to have, is this sort of multi-year, decadal sort of thinking. Because when you look back in that time frame, we've been working in this space, and we started some new things. And I think the workshop in last August, a year ago, is another case where we tried a few things actually coming out of the establishment of the Joint Committee. Didn't work. We did have researchers go into villages, but there was no traction. So what's occurred, I think, since is Greenland has built some institutions and is still building institutions that will help sustain where the U.S. wants to be. We've already seen a very strong focus on young people, and that's how I think, again, in a generational viewpoint, that's where the future lies. We need to, both in terms of education and in partnerships, giving people opportunities, as again we heard with exchange programs. So, and NSF can actually bring several tools. There was a question of, should we have another workshop? I love workshops. That's my middle name, Simon Workshop Stevenson. But
This is your 30-second warning, sir.
Yep. But there's several issues that, tools in our toolbox that go beyond workshops. They have specific names, research networking activities, or research coordination networks. And it's that networking. These are awards that can go over 2 or 3 years, and they help build and sustain the development of a network. They can be renewed, but the idea is to build the network to be something that's stronger than just a sort of a single event. And lastly, there was talk about a code of conduct. I'll just want to highlight that the US Arctic Research Establishment and the agencies that support that have redeveloped a tool that they call the Principles of Research Conduct. That's available on a website that will somehow get you. It's the Interagency Arctic Research Policy Committee website, but you can find it. Actually, it's at the bottom of that. But that's a set of principles that that talk about how researchers should conduct themselves, such as be accountable and develop effective communications with the people that you're working with. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. We have 2 more panelists that we're going to bring up, so we'll bring up Nimesh Patel next. Sorry.
Forward is that one.
Hi everyone, I'm Nimesh Patel from the Center for Astrophysics, Harvard and Smithsonian in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I'm really happy to be here. I was in Nuuk last year in August, and I'm really happy to see some of my friends from Greenland here at this meeting. And I want to thank Jen for inviting me here to talk to you about the project we are working on. This is the Greenland Telescope project, which began about 8 years ago when the National Science Foundation awarded this antenna to the Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory and the Academia Sinica Institute in Taiwan, this 12-meter diameter dish, which was part of the much larger instrument called the Atacama Large Millimeter Array, which is now in operation in Chile, in Atacama. So this dish was in New Mexico, Socorro, and we have refurbished, retrofitted, and made it sort of operational, suitable for very cold environment. So why Greenland? Why are we putting this? Why have we put this antenna up here? So that's what I want to tell you today. So this telescope is actually part of the so-called Event Horizon Telescope, which you would have heard about. The most recently, on April 10th this year, these results were announced. The first image of the shadow of a black hole ever imaged. So this was from the Event Horizon Telescope collaboration. And our Greenland telescope is one of the 3 new telescopes which we are adding to this Event Horizon Telescope network of telescopes. So Greenland is a really important site because of its geographic location. So where we are in Greenland, we get this very large, very long baseline length north-south. So on this map, you can see Greenland to Atacama, Alma, Chile. That is about 9,000 kilometers north-south baseline. So not just the length, not just the long distance, but also the geometry is important, also the orientation. It has to be north-south for this particular source, M87. That will help us obtain a much sharper image of the black hole. And we are also adding 2 other antennas. So the other antenna is in France. It's called the North European Millimeter Array, NOEMA, in Grenoble, France. And the third antenna is a 12-meter diameter dish in University of Arizona. So our goal is to actually, this is just the beginning, this remarkable result, which was recently awarded the Breakthrough Prize. This remarkable result is actually just the beginning. We are now able to do this kind of science. And we want to now build up on our methods. We know that these methods work, so we want to actually expand on this. So that's our main goal. Okay, so now I want to give you some idea of what is going on at our telescope. So we finished building the telescope sometime in late summer of 2017. And we actually observed this same black hole object, the same source, in April 2018 as part of the Event Horizon Telescope. And we are presently analyzing those data. And so these are some pictures from the observations of that black hole source in April 2018 with our colleagues at the telescope. You can see some of the pictures of some instruments here. So this is the data recording system. We record data on these banks of disk drives and then ship them to Massachusetts, where they are correlated to obtain the image. This is the picture of some graph which shows the accuracy of the hydrogen maser clock, which we have here at Greenland. That is absolutely key requirement for our method to work. And I'll skip these slides, but these are some of the milestones we have met in the last couple of years in this project. But our goal really is to bring this antenna eventually at the center of the ice sheet, at the summit station, because that is where the atmosphere is really very stable, very dry for allowing this kind of astronomy. So that is for future. Now I want to just quickly show you a couple of slides on the effort on education and outreach, which I am personally very interested in. So these kind of radio telescopes are really very interesting and complex systems which have many, many different areas in science and engineering. And it provides a very unique opportunity for students to get involved in and learn about many different aspects. So we are very interested in pursuing these opportunities, particularly for Greenlandic students. And we want to also use the existing channels. For example, at Harvard, we have undergrad research interns, and so we can invite students to join us. So here are some pictures. These are high school students from the neighboring village called Kanak. So they visited on 5th May with their teacher. And I myself have been advising and mentoring a student who is originally from Greenland, who grew up in Nuuk, and she studied in Denmark, in Aalborg, for her undergraduate studies in physics. And she has worked with me both the 2018 and last summer on a research project probing chemistry in star-forming regions. So she's actually going to present these results at the American Astronomical Society meeting in January in Hawaii next year. And we are also writing up this as a paper for a refereed journal. So in summary, the Greenland telescope is fully operational now at Thule Air Base, and the telescope has great cultural, intellectual, and educational value for the Greenlandic people. And we have begun some activities on education and outreach, and we are really interested in continuing those. Thank you.
Thank you, Nimesh. And our last panelist is Iris Ferguson. Iris brings a slightly different perspective, so that's why I saved her until last.
Great, thank you all for having me here today. Appreciate the opportunity. I've been working for the Air Force for about 2.5 years on Arctic policy, and as part of that effort, I've taken upon myself to take senior leaders to the region to actually walk and see the different assets that we have. And as you all know, that part of the challenge is actually understanding and physically seeing the changes that are taking place. So we've taken leaders at a 3- and 4-star level across our sites that we own across Alaska, whether it be our bases that host tankers and fighter aircraft or radars in the North Slope of Alaska across Canada. And then also to Thule Air Base, where we have a spatial situational awareness and missile defense asset, and then down to Kangerlussuaq. And we've met with the Danish Joint Arctic Command to talk through partnerships and opportunities and understanding more of their maritime domain awareness challenges that they face. And one of the unique pieces about when we go to Greenland that I find relevant for this audience is that every time we have gone to Greenland, we've brought scientists with us, largely that are affiliated with the National Science Foundation. And the imperative for that is clearly that to understand how one operates in the environment, you also understand the environment. And so by having scientists able to talk to some of these senior leaders, they not only understand some of the environmental implications for our operations in the future, but also how the impacts that are occurring in Greenland have broader effect for the world at large that we need to be considering as an Air Force going forward. And so from an Air Force perspective, obviously science has been very inextricably linked to our operations. The history of our cooperation is long on the Greenland island. Since early, we've had a very symbiotic relationship, and in some ways, since the 1940s, it's actually Greenland was a vital refueling stop en route to Europe. And weather stations often provided not only safety of flight, but also helped with larger meteorological efforts for the European continent. And then we also had studies of glaciology and the ionosphere, which allowed us to fully understand HF communications and how to mitigate some of those ionospheric challenges for comms. So when I heard this morning, I heard Alice Rogoff say that, I don't know how many people understand whether or not Greenland is a part of the North American continent. And I would say airmen and women are very cognizant of Greenland being part of the North American continent, and that we know that North American defense is incredibly reliant on our knowledge of the Arctic environment, and that Greenland is obviously a key component of that system. So I just have a couple of quick slides to show how U.S. Air Force supports Greenland research. And our Air National Guard asset is probably the most visible way that you see our support for research. It operates out of Kangerlussuaq, and we do training runs to Camp Raven. But we support science by transiting passengers and cargoes and fuel to remote locations, including NSF Summit Station. And the key piece of the LC-130 is obviously that it's ski-equipped and can land in really challenging environments, but that it can carry a lot of pounds. It can carry up to 26,000 pounds of cargo. And not only are we helping transport folks, but we also are aiding in knowledge on data and collecting data en route. So we have ice pods that are attached to the bottom of some of these LC-130s, which aid in ice imaging and helping us understand not only how fast the ice sheets are changing, but also why they're changing so fast and how. And then Thule Air Base, as you've heard mentioned, and quite a few of the number of projects that we've heard already mentioned, it's really kind of is an enabler of science in the region. Obviously, we have a really critical Air Force mission that is space situational awareness, but we also take advantage of this really incredible footprint that we have there to help enable a lot of science in a kind of a logistic launch pad, if you will. And so this box here on the far right speaks to some of the various institutions that we help in their logistics. And it's actually, the scientific mission has become so important to the Thule Air Base mission that we actually added the word scientific research to our mission statement just some 5 years ago. And so that will continue to be a long-lasting and enduring part of the mission. And how this airbase helps the scientific community, it's in multiple ways. We have the physical infrastructure, obviously itself, where we're able to build and have research lab services, how we have warehouses and staging, some dorms and cold storage. And we also host scientists, dozens of folks that we've mentioned here that come in the summer and then in the winter to study atmospheric astrophysics, wildlife, and seismic monitoring. And then we also have, we also have testing on base. As you've heard mentioned in some of these panels, we have a Thule High Arctic Atmospheric Observatory, which is on South Mountain, which is kind of about 20-minute drive away from the base. It's one of 70 global ground-based remote sensing stations detecting changes in the atmosphere. We just heard about the Greenland Telescope, which provides incredible research being done just uniquely because of its location. And these efforts that Nimesh spoke about bringing students on base local students on base to help understand the critical location and scientific research is something that we are highly supportive of and hope to continue to grow and foster And it also operates as a logistic hub. You heard about these NASA flight operations via Icebridge. We also have a help with the Greenland Inland Traverse, which is in the event that our LC-130s can't carry things or there's something that's too large, there's a 740-mile tractor traverse that hauls fuel and cargo to inland stations. And then we also have a deep water port. It's actually the northernmost deep water port in the world. And so we can enable joint and European research vessels to help gain access to this incredible region. And actually, Icebreaker Odin is there this week and for facilitating a number of scientists coming onto base now. So this is, in a nutshell, some of the various efforts that we show to show how the Air Force reliance is not only on science, but also in support of science, that we hope to continue building, obviously, on the strong history that already exists within our mutual defense relationship between the US, Denmark, and Greenland, and that science plays an incredibly integral role in these efforts.
Thanks, Iris. Okay, we have just over 10 minutes available in this session for questions. And I think I'll start before I turn it over to the audience. Last week at the Arctic Futures 2050 conference, I actually wrote down some notes as Lena was speaking. And she said that capacity building can go both ways. It's the most respectful way of doing it, and we need to teach our children about the outside world, she was speaking of Greenlanders, and teach the outside community about our world, their world, the Greenlandic world. And only in this way, the communication between different ways of understanding our being in the universe will bring us closer together. She did, though, go on to recognize that it's not always easy with the language barriers. So in that light, I know that Nimesh talked about examples of having a Greenlandic student here working here in the US with you. We've supported Greenlandic students coming. We had a student just get her master's degree at the University of Minnesota, and it was also probably her biggest challenge was passing the English exams. And so I was wondering if you could talk about that challenge as well as any other recognized challenges in capacity building between the two research communities.
Yeah, so this particular student I had, Ivalu Christensen, she did her undergrad studies at Aalborg University in Denmark, and her English was really quite good. I did not have any problems about communication of the science part with her at all, but I would say, in fact, that it worked the other way around. She was able to translate the science part of the project that she worked on in Greenlandic. And she, in fact, gave a talk in Greenlandic to local folks in Nuuk sometime last year after she finished working with me that summer. So I find that actually very, very important, because when we have these visitors from, for example, Kanak or other schools in Greenland at the telescope, the situation is quite different. We even if you speak in English as we do and try to explain everything to them, it is their teacher who has to translate everything in Greenlandic for the students. And this, after a while, this becomes tiring actually for the students. So it is really very important for a person like Ivalu to be there with us at the telescope. And we are actually very hopeful that this will happen, that she will in fact help us with this outreach, being a Greenlandic person herself. And I think this is what I look forward to.
Any other comments from the panelists or experiences?
Well, I could just add briefly that some of the other efforts that the Air Force is undertaking in terms of trying to incorporate local Greenlandics into the system, for better or worse of a way to say it. We have an entrepreneurship program that we are trying to build upon, where we bring folks from across Greenland to train and study alongside our airmen on Thule Air Base. And we obviously have a lot of joint work with the Danish, and we have a Danish liaison officer that we work very closely with. So trying to continue to invest heavily in some of those efforts that create a mutually beneficial arrangement for both our airmen and also for the locals is at top priority.
Great. I think it's just on.
It's on, all right. So So, NSF projects work all around the world. So, I think we are prepared in grants to support some level of interaction. But I think sort of looking forwards, and then, the next panel is going to talk about Greenlandic priorities for research. And with this relatively new concept of co-production, if you haven't heard of co-production, you haven't been asleep or anything. It's really relatively new in the scientific community and developing in the Arctic over the last few years. So we will need to make sure that there are resources to help the research enterprise with the co-production aspect. But I think it's also fair to say that NSF funding, and I'm guessing the same with NASA, we're not really in a good position to actually to do a lot of basic language work. That's probably a limit to what we can do with the resources that we have.
Okay, thank you. So I'd like to open it up to the audience for questions, and we have a couple of hands up, so we'll start here and then we'll go over there.
Yeah, thanks for a couple of great talks. This is more a comment than a question. It was great to hear Mr. Patel tell us about how a Greenlandic student was involved, and we really like that and encourage that as well. And also the fact that that the Greenlandic students can then explain the research to the local community. It both overcomes the language barrier, but it also creates role models for the young Greenlandic students that they can see that this is actually a career path that you can take as a Greenlander also. So that's a great effort.
Thank you. And then I think there was a hand up over here.
So I'm Paul Moore, and I'm the director of the Polar Geospatial Center at the University of Minnesota. And we had an activity funded under Simon's program a few years ago under the U.S. chairmanship of the Arctic Council to provide, basically to produce a high-resolution map of the Arctic. And Melissa Larson was my student at the University of Minnesota. She applied. She was accepted, not as a Greenlander, as a student. The primary problem was English. But one of the things I want to point out here is that map that's on the table that we were giving out of the Arctic. It was Melissa and a staff person from ASIAC that built Greenland. And so that topography was built by Greenlanders. And it's also worth pointing out that Greenland is now one of the best mapped countries in the world because of those two people.
Thanks, Paul. Other questions or comments from the audience? There's a hand up in the back. And then there's another one over there next.
Henry Hedger. I wondered about the situation with Navy. The Air Force is here, of course, with a representative. I happened to be at Navy Credit Union recently, and they have a photo up of Waikiki Beach endangered by sea level rise. And I wondered, is there a need to link what we've learned here from the gentleman from NASA, the potential melting of a good deal of the ice sheet in Greenland, and the serious nature being faced by people in diverse areas of our nation, such as Hawaii and also like Miami, which has been suffering from sea level rise. The problem appears to be imminent rather than something 100 or 200 years away.
Iris, do you want to speak from the greater perspective of the DoD?
Sure. Yeah, obviously I'm not with the Navy, but happy to speak a little bit on some of Department of Defense's efforts to try to get after some of these broader implications. When I was talking at the beginning of my presentation about how we're bringing senior leaders to the region and bringing scientists along with us, actually on our very first trip we brought a man named John Englander, who is an expert in sea level rise, and he specifically talks about the role of the Greenland ice sheet and its larger feed-on effects to sea level rise in Miami and in other locations. So we are certainly trying to get after how to monitor sea level rise and the implications for how fast the ice sheet is melting and what we need to be prepared and posture for going forward. The Navy has put out a recent Arctic strategy as of June of 2019, and I would encourage you to read it to understand their posture and position in the region. The Department of Defense put out a strategy this past summer as well, trying to take into account the National Defense Strategy and what the role that Arctic plays in the larger security framework. That being said, the environmental components are still a key part of the challenge in understanding what the environmental security pieces of our operations is at the forefront, hence my talk earlier about the inextricable linkage between the two. And my small plug also of the maritime presence at Thule. I know that it is maybe not a naval asset, but actually one of the key and only Air Force maritime asset that is a tugboat is actually at Thule. And so I would just like to highlight that we do have a surface presence there, but it performs a very unique mission.
Thank you. And there was a question in the back, I think, up there. It was.
Hi. I was wondering, I know that there's Danish descent people from Denmark living in Greenland, and there's also native people living there. How we assure that the U.S. engagement in research and education and everything goes actually to the native people and not the Danish people? I guess the Danish people or descent have better access to Denmark institutions and access to global places, I guess, than the native.
I think that might be a question best left for the fireside chat later, unless Rebecca or Inatek want to address that question now. But I think that that's probably a question more for Greenland than it is for us to talk a little bit about the difference in the history. We'll wait. Okay, Inatek is saying they'll talk about that during the fireside chat. Okay. Any other questions? So maybe we'll end right on time, Mike. Okay. Thank you. Thanks to all of our speakers.
And now to the last panel. We saved the best for last. It's the Greenland priorities and perspectives on the U.S. Greenland scientific cooperation. Because I was saying earlier to Alice that next to the military presence that the U.S. has, I think the scientific engagement in Greenland, is second after the U.S. military. So there's a lot, it has a great importance to Greenland that we develop this scientific cooperation between the U.S. and Greenland. We're gonna have, the Greenlanders that were on earlier back in the panel, but I think I'll start with Lenore Grenoble, who's a John Matthews Manley Distinguished Service Professor, Department of Logistics and Humanities, Collegiate Division, University of Chicago. I've known Lenore for a number of years now, since she started coming to Greenland to learn actually Greenlandic and study, but also have worked with Greenlanders for a number of years, and to give her perspectives and experiences, and how we can develop the U.S. Greenland Science Cooperation. And after your presentation, I would like to invite the other panelists to come up, so they can give their perspectives on what's the next steps that we can take on this collaborative efforts that we engaged in, and what are the Greenland priorities for that. So, Lenore.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I am thrilled to be here. It was just an honor to be invited. I am a linguist, and so you've been hearing from the hard scientists, and my perspective is going to be a little different. I am sporting some Greenlandic fashion, a bracelet that I got in a Luliset, and some Greenlandic gold. So I'm going to talk, as I said, a little bit differently. If I can. Okay. And I want to first begin by acknowledging the funders. Inuutak asked me to talk about my experiences as a researcher, and none of what I have done could be done without funding. And I've also acknowledged the government of Greenland, although they have not paid me anything, they have paid my collaborators. And so this is what I'm talking about. I'm going to go through this really fast. I don't have very much time. And like all the other researchers, you saw how everybody gets excited when they talk about their research. I'm no exception. So I'll just move forward. And this is what I'm going to talk about. I made these slides by myself, and you will see the same kinds of themes that we've been talking about all along. So these are the issues, and I'm not going to talk about all of them for the same, some I'll skip over. So first of all, we need time. If we want to build collaborative research, we need time. And you've heard this over and over again, but we need time for relationships and partnerships. We need time to figure out where our shared interests are. We need time to construct the collaborations, to determine the appropriate methodologies, and actually to do the research. All of that takes a lot of time. So here's the example. I started, as Inuutak said, we met in 2007. That was 12 years ago. This is funding that came from the Institute of Arctic Studies at the Dickey Foundation of Dartmouth. I was at Dartmouth at the time. There's some pictures of some people who are now older looking. Not here. We went to Greenland. We went basically on a reconnaissance mission. We went to see if we would be interested in working in Greenland and if Greenland would be interested in us working with them. And we took the time to meet with a lot of different stakeholders in Nuuk, with the government, with the Institute of Natural Sciences. We met with, now I'm not remembering the name in English, sorry. And we met with a whole bunch of different stakeholders to see what they wanted. And this took time, and it also took some seed money. It took money to go there, and we were there for about a week. Greenland is expensive. What we learned in 2007, some high priorities for Greenland, were the need to disseminate research results to the Greenland public. You've heard that again and again. This is 12 years later. We still have this challenge. We've made progress, but we still have a challenge. We need to engage foreign researchers with Greenlanders, and we need to build capacity in Greenland. That's what we were told then. Now, I'm a linguist, so it's a little bit easier for me than people who are working on telescopes because I need to work with people. But what I did was I went and thought about ways to engage Greenlanders. And one of the results that we got was this grant, NSF IGER, that was funded to Ross Virginia, who's not here with us. His name's come up several times. He's the lead PI. And part of it was training U.S. researchers in Greenland. And my piece of that project was to bring them to Nuuk for 2 weeks so that they could meet with people and see that there are many people in Greenland who are interested in their research and to start building these collaborations. We do see this as a long-term investment. Lauren Culler is a product of that project, and that's why she's here today, and it just takes some time. So we engage with a wide range, and some of these foster collaborations, Dartmouth is now involved in JSEP, which you've heard about, and I mentioned something that I did. There's a whole lot of things that have come out of that. I brought 2 Greenlanders to the Institute in 2017 to work with me, teaching students there, so that also the linguists could meet Greenlanders and see what that was like. Challenges. One of the big challenges is differing work calendars. American researchers do their field work in the summers. Greenlanders take vacation in July. This is just, it just is. There is a huge amount of time pressure on US-based researchers to get very quick results and to publish them quickly. This is at odds with long-term investment in collaboration. I want to talk a little bit about research questions, because as you've heard, there's a strong commitment in Greenland to research that benefits society, and this often translates into applied research. There is not that commitment on the US side, and often that's at odds with the funding agencies. So I want to give an example, and it has to do with some work that I did with the Greenland Language Secretariat, which is part of the government of Greenland. Language keeps coming up. Language is really important in Greenland. So I went to the Greenland Language Secretariat and I said, what would you like me to do? How can I work with you? And they said, well, we want a dictionary and you can do some stuff with place names. We're part of, they're doing this place names reclamation project. The National Science Foundation is not interested in building dictionaries. That's not seen as science. That's what they wanted. So we did get a grant to fund the Chicago side of the collaboration. And what we did was we looked at the theoretical issues of Kalaallisut, Greenlandic. Kalaallisut is a polysynthetic language, and this is where it's really cool. Because if you have a dictionary, you put words into the dictionary, and you think that's obvious if you speak English, even though in English it's not always obvious. But in Kalaallisut, it's not obvious what a word is. So to make a word in Kalaallisut, and if you watch Lena's slides, you saw those words get long. You take a root, you add a suffix. Suffixes usually have meaning. You can add another suffix. You can add another one if you want, and you can keep going on until you can't think anymore. So let's take an example. Here's a good word, a nice word, a noun. Achlu. Achlu means the breathing hole in the ice that the seal comes up in. This really shows you how fundamental this is in Greenland society for a bunch of reasons you can imagine. But we take this word achlu. Let's add a suffix, ak. Then we get achluak. And it is something that is like a seal breathing hole, which is actually the fishing hole that you cut in the ice. Notice which is primary. This makes a lot of sense if you've been to Greenland. So it's primary is where the seal comes in. So you add this, so now you have another noun. Do you put that noun in the dictionary? Any Greenlander, Lena's grandchildren, her 4-year-old can tell you what that word means because it's really obvious. Let's keep going though, and I said you could do it. Let's take another suffix and add lior, so then you can make an X. So we have aklualior, but that's not a complete word. That one doesn't go in the dictionary unless you just want roots in there. So we have to add some grammar. Third person singular indicative, the he, she, its form. There's no gender, but anyways. Akluakliopok, right? To make a fishing hole in the ice. So the thing is that if you want to play around with this, you can get long words. And so here's one that is made. This isn't a great translation, but you can see that we have something like, once again, they were trying to make a communications company again. This is, Lena did it a second time. She added a couple of gooks to get more agains in there. And the other thing about these, and you could keep doing it. And then the other tricky thing about these suffixes is sometimes when you add them to a stem, they eat the preceding consonant. Sometimes they make consonant changes. So what this actually means is that this language is a beast to learn as a second language speaker. So children are speaking this quite fluently. And one of the humbling things, of course, as a linguist is I am surrounded in Greenland by experts who may be this tall, but can speak better than I ever will. So that's one reason it's pretty obvious that I need to do collaborative research. So what we did with and I'm saying we because there was a team, took their need and desire for a Greenlandic English dictionary. We built some theoretical words on wordhood, articles on wordhood that were published in referee journals, and built a database with people in Greenland. They took the database and they put it in an app. That wasn't my idea, that was their idea. They built the app. The Greenland government funded the app. They also were interested in what happened. As I told you, they wanted me to look at place names, actually just to learn more about Greenlandic. They didn't need me at all for the place names. They did all the place names, replacing Danish place names with Kalaallisut, the Greenlandic names. They did that on their own. But as I started looking into place names, I found out it had a lot to do with landscape. And there were a lot of naming practices. So if Josephine and Lena are from Kakotok, that means the white place. So there's lots of Nuuk is the headland. There's a lot of things that are obvious. I found that in working on place names, looking at them linguistically, a lot of people got interested in the project, and young people came around with me interviewing people and more interviews because they were interested in what the older people had to say, and they were interested in differences and how they said it. So it was a kind of research. There was a back and forth where they said, look at, the Greenland Language Secretary said, look at place names. I had this other idea. We got more people on, and so forth and so on. One of the things that came out of this was documenting plant knowledge. We had an IGERT student who was interested in plant knowledge, and this is actually in southern Greenland and Katsiasuk in the schools, and the woman there has actually published a book on plant usage. But we did a lot of that work. So let me just go on, because I know I have to speak quickly. I want to talk a little bit about unexpected expectations and biases that have not really come up. And one is that we are often, as US-based researchers, in danger of transplanting a US North American view of indigeneity. So there's been talk about this. The population of Greenland is largely indigenous Inuit. and we often assume U.S. ethics. This is based often from our own research practices or from coming from Native American communities here in the U.S. So one of the things that I come across all the time is an assumption that Greenland is frozen in time, that we're talking about hunters and that they're hunting the way they did here is in this bottom photograph of 1724. People aren't museum pieces, they're living and moving forward. And so when we're talking about hunters, we have to look at who they are today. As a matter of fact, the Association of Fishers and Hunters in Greenland is a highly sophisticated organization staffed by highly sophisticated people. You'll see that the website, if I can figure out the pointer, whoops. Well, you'll see the website's in 3 languages, and the people I've met with at KNAPK are also trilingual, as are the presenters here today. They're speaking to you in their 3rd language, English. So you also see that this is modern equipment. So when we're talking about hunters, their experience can really, really vary. And the other thing is just sort of assuming U.S. sensibility. So in submitting an article for peer review, I was asked if I had consulted with the community. You will notice if you've been listening, the speakers have been very careful to talk about communities. There are multiple voices in Greenland. Relatively small population, but not homogeneous. It's a complex society and people have very different experiences. So it's really important. I worked in Nuuk, which is about 18,000 people. What's the community? How do I consult with the community? I can consult with the government, but is the government, it's a kind of funny question based on an idea that there's a tribal council that I can go to. Greenland it's a country. So my next steps, I just want to throw out where I'm going with my research since I'm supposed to talk about my research. And one of the things that we discovered, especially when the Greenlanders came to Kentucky to work with me, and something that's going on widely in the Arctic is massive urbanization. That's not an issue that's come up, but since I work with the people, it comes up in my life all the time. And working with people in Nuuk and Sisimiut, that's a huge percentage of the population of Greenland living in 2 cities. And what we are finding so far is that the language is changing faster in Nuuk than in Sisimiut. This isn't particularly surprising. This is something I'm looking at in other places of the Arctic, in the Russian Arctic and in the Norwegian Arctic. We see that cities drive change. And given that Nuuk has a huge percentage, Nuuk alone, a huge percentage of the Greenland population. So we want to look at the kinds of changes that are happening there and how that is affecting well-being. So that's anchoring the research back into benefits for society. We can say koenok, or we can add a suffix, koenusok. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lenore. And I forgot to introduce myself as well. I'm Inuit Holm-Olsen. I'm the head of representation here in Washington, D.C., head of the Greenland Representation. So I think with this excellent presentation, I think there's plenty to discuss moving forward. So I'd like to also ask the other panelists, as well as Lauren is also going to join us, Dr. Lauren Kuller from Dartmouth. And what you don't know about Lauren is that there's something that the Arctic residents and Greenlanders can obsess about, especially in the summertime, and that's mosquitoes. And she has studied, the role of mosquitoes and how they're changing with the climate change. So it's an important topic, for the inhabitants, in the Arctic. So please join Lenore on the panel, as well as Josefine Nyman, Lene Kielsen Holm, Allan Olsen, as well as you, yeah, and Jennifer Mercer from NSF is also going to join us.
Are you coming up? Here, take this chair.
Ja.
Oh, he's coming up with a chair.
Hi.
And since we're talking about the next step, and what it is that we can learn from, today's discussions, as well as the seminar last year that was held in Nuuk, and moving forward. So maybe we'll start with the Greenlanders and then end with the US participants. So Lene, would you like to take the word?
I think this is a very exciting era. We have been trying to move forward for many years, like Lenore were also mentioning, about the involvement of the Greenlandic people in research, both because our educational skills has not been sufficient for many of us, but a good thing is that the Greenland government, throughout the 40 years of its existence, with Greenland Home Rule and now self-government, has always been prioritizing the educational sector of the community. So I look forward to be part of this further development, and I think I will just stop there.
So yes, how to move forward with this, and what wishes do we have from Greenland also on the future cooperation? There are some experiences, I guess you can call it, that US are excellent in having, and that is coordination. I know that there are, I guess, 22 different governmental bodies in Alaska, and I know that every time there's a project running where you need some environmental impact statements, there are tens of, maybe 10 or 12 governmental bodies involved, and that requires coordination. And as we just mentioned we have been talking about previously, is that with the new hub, the research hub we are planning on having in Greenland, and the coordination of the research that's going to take place, I guess that there is some potential for mutual learning or getting some experiences from the US side of things. What we also very much lack in Greenland is funding to the research that we wish to do. I know that there are certain frameworks for the funding in the US, but on the other hand, this is the US, and as I have learned, everything is possible in the US. So I guess there must be some ways forward on that one as well. So I guess I will stop here and we can talk later.
Yeah, I would like to take up the thread from Professor Grenoble's excellent talk on how to do applied research, and it's correctly observed, as you stated in your talk, that the focus in Greenland is really on applied research. So a wealthy society can afford to do basic research, but in Greenland, where we have limited funds available and limited human resources, we really need the money that we invest in research to have a direct benefit to society. And we find that very important, and that's the main criteria, or one of the main criteria we use when we distribute the limited funds that are available to the Greenland Research Council. We have about $175,000 available per year to to support general research projects in Greenland. And we distribute about 2 to 3 PhD and postdoc scholarships per year. That's the amount of funding that is available to the Greenland Research Council to distribute. So when we prioritize that money and those efforts, it goes towards projects that have a direct benefit to society, so applied research over all the disciplines, but it has to be applied, and it also has to be anchored in Greenland, so it has to have a connection to institutions, scientific institutions in Greenland, so that we build capacity in Greenland. And we would really like to see that the funding agencies that invest in research in Greenland also to some extent prioritize that kind of effort. So include applied aspects in the research projects and make sure that some of the research is also anchored in Greenland. That can be done in several ways. One way is, of course, if funding can be allocated to Greenlandic partners so that there are work packages assigned to people at Greenlandic institutions. But it could also be jointly supervised PhD projects or postdoc projects where the candidate is obligated to spend part of their time at Greenlandic institutions, and that way establish collaboration between US and Greenland institutions. So spend time in Greenland not only for the research, for the fieldwork. There are lots of US scientists spending a lot of time on research, on fieldwork in Greenland, but also spending time at the research institutions that are actually there in Greenland, so that we have the day-to-day interaction and can build the trust and collaboration that we've been talking about. And finally, it could be also that some of the researchers coming through Greenland on fieldwork were obligated to visit research institutions or educational institutions to talk about their research. And have that opportunity also to discuss collaboration and build opportunities for future projects. So those were a few examples of how we see that this increased collaboration could be initiated.
Inuta. So I'm not sure if this is messing with your format, but I had a couple of presentations from projects that are ongoing in Greenland to build on what Lenore, your experiences as well. I think we would like to share some of the Greenlandic Projects experiences. Is it okay, Inuta? Well, you're the boss. So this is just a couple of pointers. It's meant as pointers to how to prepare and conduct projects, research projects in Greenland. Of course, these are not perfect recipes, but are real life experiences that we would like to share. It has been compiled by two researchers, one being Morten Melgaard, who is in charge of the Greenland project concerning the Greenlandic sled dog. Yes, Morten Melgaard is a professor at the University of Greenland and the University of Copenhagen. So just a backgrounder, the Greenlandic sled dog is a unique animal genetically, culturally, and health-wise. It represents the largest living working dog culture in the world. And it's threatened by climate change, and the population is in steep decline. So there's sort of a burning platform to, take an interest in the well-being of that
animal that is so important to Greenland. This is sort of a structure of how they went about the project in preparing, setting up a lot of partnerships internationally, as well as having national partners in Greenland. So there's a lot of engagement going on there, and a lot of coordination between Greenlandic institutions and international institutions as well. It's all about network, of course, and Morten Melgaard probably has a pretty large network as well. Yeah. The activities, of course, is divided into research and a lot of outreach, and then some miscellaneous activities that came on sort of on the tailwind of carrying out the project. So what they do is interest themselves in how to anchor the research that they conduct into the anchor and activate the research that they do into the Greenlandic society and actually make a difference with the project that they're working on. It's a huge group of people. I think it's like 14, 15 people in one room from all sorts of disciplines, and it's really something. Yes. This is a list of their most important goals, which is to fulfill the Greenland Perspective vision. I represent Greenland Perspective, so I'm very happy about that. The Greenland Perspective vision of activating research into the Greenlandic society, which we've been talking about all day. And collecting knowledge about and explore the sled dog with regards to what I just said with genetics, cultural history and health. But also to encourage and create and support the interest and pride in the sled dog culture, as it is under threat by climate change and various other factors, and to contribute to a healthy dog population. And sharing knowledge and sharing research results and develop communication tools for national use and international as well. And then which is why I'm happy to be able to talk about it. They want to be a role model for future projects. So if I'm sure that if you would like to know more about what sort of thinking went into creating this project, Morten would be very happy to help out. Yeah, so these really nice pictures. I just want to, so that's the group of people. The top photo is the group of people involved. Not sure if it's everyone, but they held a number of workshops in Greenland over several days, getting to know each other really well, and getting inspired by the various disciplines that they represented. Along with, as a part of the project, a Greenlandic PhD was funded. The bottom picture shows a picture of Manumina on their Facebook site. In Greenland, everybody uses Facebook, so I mean that's the platform for outreach and communication. I just want to point that out. And these were some of the sort of the principles of the project. So it's sort of a principle framework that has put in place. So Morten and his group spent a lot of time trying to figure out how can we go about this in a way that fits with the conversation that we're having here today. To engage with the Greenlandic population and the Greenlandic science community, and I said engage, right? Engage and cooperate, and try to make a difference for the people that we are actually studying, and make an impact that way. Yeah, there's a lot there's also something about trust and stakeholders. You've all read it now, so anyways. interestingly enough, some learning points. So what they managed to do was create a space that allowed for this equal room for all these various disciplines and levels of experience, and across, also very importantly, across national identities. So it's not a bunch of Western scientists coming into a Greenlandic setting and telling people how to live their lives. It was sort of on a mutual understanding. Focus on anchoring and presence, very important. Building up trust. And what they also sort of learned was you need to source and allocate more resources for anchoring and cooperation and outreach as well. It just takes money, and you need to factor that in when you make your applications to the NSF, Jennifer. And also a pre-project workshop really helped them out in trying to figure out what they wanted to do, and they actually flew in people from other dog mushers, from other dog musher cultures, Russia and Canada, to sort of find out what are we really talking about here, and what's worth investigating. Yes. They also cooperated with a couple of photographers, with Carsten Evang, as his name is. I mean, he really takes some awesome shots. So yeah, I'm very happy about this particular one. Yeah. Going on to the next presentation. Thank you, Jack. So this particular presentation is from a national survey that was conducted last summer by a team of PhDs based in Copenhagen. They called the project the Greenlandic Perspective Survey, and this is from the perspective of Kelton Miner, who is one of the PhDs involved. So it's a research project about the Greenlanders' view of the future of their own country, and it involves a couple of cooperation partners. Greenland Perspective, which is myself and my boss, Minik Rosing, based in Copenhagen. My university, or the university I'm based at, Elisabeth and the University of Copenhagen. It's sponsored by Kraks Fond Byforskning, the Kraks Foundation for Urban Studies, I'm not sure, and Statistics Greenland, the national agency for statistics. So the survey was conducted all across Greenland, 13 different locations, big cities, small cities, settlements, all regions of Greenland. So it took a lot of logistics and planning. Kelton has been kind enough to share some of the cooperation points that he sort of picked up from conducting this project. So, starting before the project, I mean, really engaging with the science community in Greenland and others early in the process to get the required feedback in order to make your project better. I mean, we talked about this already. Yeah, and build a team that also involves, Greenlandic people. So how do you say that? The rightmost people on the picture are based in Denmark, including Minik Rosing, who is in the middle, at the bottom, and then the rest of the faces there are based in Greenland. 5 student assistants and and then also a couple of researchers that help sort of shape the survey. During the project, there was a lot of focus on getting ourselves on Facebook and telling a story about what we were doing, so people could follow us, and involving the local Greenlandic media as well. And they took up an interest in following. There are two major outlets. There's a national newspaper, and then there's a national radio, and they're pretty interested in research stories. So grab a hold of them if you're able to. And after the project finished, we made an effort to present our findings to the Greenlandic audience first, because it's a survey about what the Greenlandic people are thinking. So we found it most appropriate that we would talk to them first about what we found in a couple of public presentations before actually communicating the results on a broader scale. Recently, I say we, taking up sharing some of the honor, but really I did nothing in this regard. But Kelton and the project recently published a report, both in Greenlandic and English, to reach a local and international audiences. And the Greenlandic part is important, even though it might not be read. We don't know that. It should be available in a language that the people of Greenland can access. It's online somewhere, you can find it. And they're currently co-writing publications and articles with the partners that they found while preparing and conducting the project in Greenland. So that's another way to cooperate. And yeah, here's a long quote from Kelton. I'm not going to read it. I think it mirrors much of the things that has been said here today. So I'll just leave it until you turn it off, Inutil. Thank you very much.
We move to the table.
All right, thank you. So I just want to start out by saying it's always really humbling being around all of you. It's so inspiring to hear from you and to hear about your work and ideas. And that's something I want to go back to or make a few remarks on, because I've always felt that way since working in Greenland, since I went with Lenore in 2009 for IGERT. And that summer, her and Ross Virginia put in a great deal of effort to really introduce us to the various communities in Greenland. So we met with folks at the Inuit Circumpolar Council, we met with the Hunters and Fishers Association, we met Inutech and various other members of the Greenland government at the time. I think I had already met Lena, who was visiting Dartmouth. We met Josefina out at Nuuk Basic, and that was a really great introduction to Greenland. And every year I've gone back. And to some extent, it's Greenland and its beauty and it's the research and the science that keeps drawing me back to Greenland. But more than anything, it's the people and how welcoming and kind and patient they've been with me and my colleagues as we've tried to figure out how to do research in Greenland. So once again, being here, it's really inspiring. And I have all these ideas for projects. So I think that was something echoed at our workshop last year, too, was just the importance of being together in person. Being together at events like this, where we're making formal, informal presentations, but then also more informal time over meals at banquets and receptions to really just talk and get to know each other. One of the things that has allowed me to do work with the Joint Science Education Project is to really rely on my network. So, for example, one of the students from Elisimatus Arfik who came to Dartmouth, her name is Misha Leonard. She's about to finish her PhD, but we met back when we were both students, and she's now one of our equal partners in JSEP. And it's because of those sort of early on networks that we started forming, that's kind of allowing me and my colleagues to kind of change the direction of our research and make it more collaborative. All of that being said, I think programs like IGERT, programs like JSEP that can really connect students are really important. With JSEP, sometimes I step back and I see these young people, they're teenagers, and they're from Greenland, Denmark, and the US, and they're working together on the process of science from start to finish. And one of the most impressive things is at the end of that, they give an outreach presentation at the Kangerlussuaq Airport, which, as anyone from Greenland knows, is kind of a hub for traffic. So a lot of people coming through there every day. So they set up tables, and because we have students from the 3 countries, between the group of 20, they speak a lot of different languages, always English, Danish, and Greenlandic, and usually a few extras. Last year we had Japanese, usually a few extras mixed in as well. And so they can reach just about every single person coming through the airport. So I think it's really smart to think about when you're putting together research teams, who's on your team and what skills does each person bring? We ask the students to do that, and I think we could do that more as researchers, being more intentional about who we put on our research teams. I think I'm going to end there. So thanks.
Do you want to go or do you want me to go? So I think I want to add one thing that we haven't talked about but is implicit in everything that we're saying as we're talking about collaborative research. We've been focusing on collaborations between the U.S. and Greenland. And Lena's talked about the collaborations with indigenous or local knowledge, what I like to call. But there's another kind of collaboration that's implicit in everything that we've been talking about, and this is the interdisciplinarity of everything we're doing. And I think that that's something we can't lose sight of. We're all concerned, at least on this panel, the researchers and the people I know in Greenland, we're all concerned about the changes happening in the world because of climate change and how that's impacting society and the world, both the geophysical world and the built world of the humans live in, and the dogs. So we all are living in this space, and these are really complicated problems that are playing out with these complicated issues are playing out in ways that we can't totally predict. We can't model everything. We're based on models to predict the future, but there's too many, everything's too complicated. So one of the things that this kind of collaboration brings is I'm the only linguist up here, but we've been working together, and I've learned a lot. And I like to think some people are learning some things from me, and I think we really need to keep that part in the mix. So it's really important to as we move forward, and I think that is also a priority of the National Science Foundation to bring things, across disciplines coming together. So that's one of the big advantages to this kind of collaborative research. That's all I wanted to add.
So I'll just add a little bit. For me, this is a really proud moment. Here we are continuing the conversation and moving forward in the conversation. I think Josephine probably shares that with me because we started these, how do we get people together and how do we kick off these conversations? We started that a long time ago, and now we're moving into the next phase, it almost feels like, where we have all these examples of everybody who's talked today or given presentations, examples of other researchers who are in the audience, and people who aren't here. We have examples of the U.S. and Greenlandic research community having worked together, bringing students of each other's into their projects and making plans to continue to work together. So I'll say that I have a lot of pride in where we're sitting right now in this final panel of the day. I think that Simon gave some great examples for the U.S. community in how we can continue to encourage our research community to continue these activities. And so there are workshops. There could be another workshop, Alan. I think we're all looking forward to the banquet at Greenland Science Week. But there are also, research networking activity types of proposals, and a lot of our PI community has figured out other ways to do that. And sharing those examples with each other then also gives new and younger PIs, postdocs, ideas for how they can build collaborations within their own research. So I think we have to continue to share experiences. So I think I'll leave it at that for my comments.
Well, thank you very much. There's some time for some questions. If you're burning, and want something, that you really want to know about or address, so go ahead and ask some questions.
Hello, for whoever was researching, for Professor Olson, I believe, so in relative terms, how much of, Greenland's food supply is locally gathered? How important is importing from outside, and what sort of research have you done on the possibility of agriculture in Greenland? I saw that and it stuck out, and I was like, hey, I might as well ask.
I'm really happy for two reasons. One, that you call me a professor. I'll take that. And two, your question about agriculture, because we are actually finishing up a report on agricultural research in Greenland. Yes, we have agriculture in Greenland, but what we don't have is a lot of agricultural research to help that sector develop in a way that can sustain itself in a better way. And with our report coming out, hopefully this autumn, we are trying to point out what areas of research could be important to take up if you would like to contribute to the development of this area, as food and food sourcing in Greenland is a large issue. We have lots of meat and lots of fish, and everything else we need to import, basically. So what sort of self-sufficiency can we obtain from organizing our agriculture in a new way that we have than before? I'm not so much of a food expert and import exports, so I hope I answered your question.
Okay, thank you.
So in the previous panel, we had a lot of guests, and we were very basic research oriented, although I think NSF is able to go into this co-production route. We've been quite recently, we've been quite supportive of it, and the interdisciplinary aspect and convergent research. But this is more of a comment than a question, and it's sort of picking up on Thomas's point. The Arctic research efforts in the U.S. are, I wouldn't say coordinated, but at least there's a lot of shared knowledge in the system because of this Interagency Arctic Research Policy Committee. And most of the agencies have a strong applied approach. That's why they do their science in the Department of Interior, in the Department of Agriculture. And yes, there is a Department of Agriculture interest in the Arctic. And so maybe that's an area that we should think about expanding, is pulling in some of the other agencies. In the early days of the Joint Committee, USGS, for example, in the Department of Interior, were helpful with the analysis of mineral potential. But maybe there's some other examples that we could hook in that expertise. NOAA comes to mind with fisheries. Maybe they're typical international interests aren't maybe as strong as NASA and NSF's, but maybe there's a way to bring them to the table.
Maybe I can just add a few words to that comment. That would be really great if we could expand collaboration in these areas. The way I see it is that a lot of these really great large-scale research projects that the U.S. are undertaking in Greenland have some very strong applied components that we could develop. We've heard about Operation Icebridge and all the activities around measuring what's going on with the ice cap, and everybody in the world knows that over 100 years the global sea level will rise about 1 meter. So much that when engineers design harbors in Greenland, they factor that sea level rise in to the designs. The problem is that locally around Greenland, because of local effects, gravimetric effects, and rebound when the ice cap melts, it turns out that probably the sea level will fall. So we need all this knowledge that comes out and enters the global community and awareness needs to be anchored also on the local scale, so that the communities and the governmental institutions and engineering companies working in Greenland and other places in the Arctic know how to deal with this knowledge. And the sea level rise is just one aspect. I mean, it's really important that we establish the knowledge to tell the communities what is going to happen in their local areas also. So we're missing that bridge from the large scale global impacts to the local impacts. Another place where I see a large opportunity for collaboration is on risk evaluation. So establishing what are the key risks in communities relating to climate change, and how do we deal with that on the local scale. So that's about risk evaluation and decision support systems. How can we anchor the knowledge that is generated in the science? How can we anchor that in a way that it's actually useful for local communities, not only in Greenland, also other places in the Arctic? And that's applied science in itself, that to take and integrate all the knowledge that is being produced and find ways to make it available so that it's operational to the communities.
Iris, yeah.
Should I go? Yeah. Oh. Hi, thank you for the wonderful panel. I wanted to make a comment which would lead into a question about how to facilitate on the U.S. side willing and conscientious partnerships from the scientific community. I'm a glaciologist. I spent one season a couple of years ago on the Greenland ice sheet as a co-PI in Swiss camp. And so I passed through Kangerlussuaq, and one of the things, I stayed at the KISS facility, and it's right next door to an orphanage. And I asked my colleagues, why don't we interact with the local community to engage the students in the orphanage? And my colleagues were like, it was a couple people that tried, and those kids are not easy to deal with, and they're hard to engage. And I was like, well, maybe we need to really make a much more concerted effort, and maybe the kids are not as bad as we think they are if we really try. So they kind of just blew it off. My second anecdote is a story that's derived from a conversation I had on my way to this panel. I'm at the University of Maryland. I'm in the Department of Atmospheric and Oceanic Sciences. I've been in ongoing research discussions about a satellite analysis to assess and constrain the amount of ammonium nitrate emissions coming from Greenland, right? And my colleagues are sitting around musing about what the source of that material is, and they think it's related to enhanced exposed surface area due to melting and larger proportion of area for birds to nest, and the byproduct of that is guano, which can, through the local surface chemistry, produce this nitrate and ammonium. Yet there was never a conversation about engaging the local community to talk about bird migrations or bird nesting patterns or anything like that, nor did my colleague even think that this was a workshop that he should attend, which is down the street from us. So there's a built-in lack of just conscientiousness among the U.S. science population. I get the sense that might be improving. What I would ask is what's been the cognizant panelists' perspective about this, and also as a member of the American Geophysical Union Cryospheric Sciences Executive Committee, it could be organizations like that to help institute some programs to try to retool the culture and awareness within the broader scientific community in the U.S. about how to engage the indigenous population in the science. So that's my comment.
Do you guys want to start with that?
Well, thank you very much for that last comment, because it's a really important question. I think this is a learning curve we are in the middle of, and you're right that the awareness is not implicit everywhere yet, but this is, part of this whole process to make researchers aware, not only in the U.S., but now we are here today, but actually globally, that there is a need and an obligation to engage with the people with whom you are working close by. So this is one way of addressing it, and I know we have been talking a lot about how should we make it easier for both parties, the scientists coming to Greenland and people living in Greenland, and one of the things we have been talking about is maybe to publish a framework of guidelines or something like that as a starting point. But nobody, we don't expect everything to work perfectly the first time we do anything, and we have to adapt along the way. So this is just, it is really important to know that that there are still places where there's room for improvement with information and education. So we know where to address some of our ideas.
And I'll just add that from our perspective, we very much encourage community outreach within projects and community engagement. So not just outreach, but engagement. It's something that we do both in Alaska and in Greenland. And so, we support researchers to travel ahead of time to communicate what they're going to be doing in villages. For example, in Alaska, to deconflict any activities on the sea ice or the water with the whale hunt, with the annual whale hunts, to deconflict those activities. And so we also encourage similar types of outreach in Greenland, going into communities and talking and seeing what works. And I think that we have examples of researchers that have worked really well with local schools and had schools basically do community science and participate in projects. So I don't know if anybody else has anything to add to that, but it's something that's encouraged within the context of the NSF proposal process.
I can maybe just add a little bit on that too. I have two things to say. One, I think it is really hard to show up for a field season and figure out how to also do outreach. If you're already there and you're just starting to think about it, it's really hard. I know that for my first few years in Kangerlussuaq, I was doing my Arctic mosquito research, very visible on the landscape with my nets and various contraptions for collecting them. And I went to the school a number of times and could never quite find the right person to talk to, or maybe I'd find someone who was willing to at least entertain me being there, but we couldn't speak the same language. So it took several years before I could figure out how to do that. And eventually I just started making these flyers and hanging them up all around town, saying this is who I am and this is what I'm doing. And I got them translated. So that was one effective way, but it's hard. And I think the lesson that I've learned and my colleagues have learned is you have to just keep showing up and really trying to find partners who can help you do that, because it is hard to find contacts. I'm really excited about this international hub in Greenland because I hope that will make it easier. And then secondly, with regards to the U.S. research community and their willingness to really devote time and energy to outreach and community engagement, I know that one of the challenges that my peers and I talk about a lot is at many academic institutions, there's not a lot of incentive for putting time and energy into that. And we often talk about how we've come up through these models where that's really emphasized in our training, but we're now at a time in our career where we actually have to step back and really get our research going. So I think that's a real issue that we as a U.S. community need to address before we can actually take a step forward with what we're doing in Greenland.
The last question.
Great, thank you for your presentations. This is a question primarily for Lenore, but if there's someone else that could chime in as well. I am equally as guilty as other people that have probably traveled to Greenland and thinking that if I go, it's really challenging to learn the language and I don't know how to communicate. And so I'm not even going to bother because I'm only there for 2 days. And having this panel in front of me, I'm realizing that maybe I should take a little bit more onus on myself to rectify that. But it sounds like there's communication challenges both for people that go there, but there's also this larger conscientious issue that we're dealing with here in DC of being aware of some of the facets of the culture of the society and understanding how it could play and be a utility for folks here back home. So I'm just curious if you're thinking of any kind of crash course in Greenlandic that we could potentially take advantage of.
They do exist.
They do exist. There are crash courses and there's online resources. The learning curve for Kalaallisut is like this. And the problem is you can know a word and it doesn't get you much in terms of saying but there's a flip side to that. So and I think if you want to do any kind of nuanced discussions of anything, when I work closely with fluent speakers of Kalaallisut, but they are also speaking to me in English or in Danish. So we're always working through interpretation, and that's just something I have to work with and keep vetting my results with other people. All of that said, just a few words in Kalaallisut are just a few things. It's a sign of respect, just to say a few things. Now, if you're in Nuuk and you look like I do, people will just speak to you in Danish. And if you flood when they speak Danish, and I can actually understand a lot of Danish, but I pretend I can't to force people to try to speak to me in Kalaallisut, but then they will often switch to English. If you get outside of Nuuk, the further you are from Nuuk, the more you need Kalaallisut. But even just a few words, hello, goodbye, thank you, even just thank you. And it's hard because it has that letter with Q and it's way back in your throat. But just a few words, because you're not going to be able to do much else. I mean, once I was trying to say something and somebody said to me, "Why are you saying that it's snowing in your head? Do you mean to say you're crying?" And I said, "No." But just even a few words, and you can get some few words online. It actually helps a lot.
No, I think with those wise words and instructions to researchers and research collaboration, I think thank you to everyone here. Thank you for all the advice and also your input in how to move forward on this important topic between the U.S. and Greenland. So let's give them a hand and thank them.
Pojana.
Trying to say. If it was snow.
Here.
We'll work together. Thank you for your patience as we change our water out. And thank you for your time today. I thought today was, I'll ask the minister herself, but I thought today was spectacular on a number of issues. One, we got to listen to what I think is a really important issue of research, but within the context of research and a scientific future together, US, Greenland, the globe. To me, the issues that were brought up today are kind of exemplify what's happening in the Arctic. We heard climate change. I wrote these down. Climate change, culture, language, food, research, defense, security, energy, economic development, and why is it snowing in your brain? Which I will use sometime when it's appropriate. But to me, all of these dynamic issues, Minister, are really emblematic of the Arctic. I mean, we're asking questions about all of these issues. That's been the premise for these Greenland Dialogues. In fact, if you match, without the snowing in your brain issue, if you match the other 9, it goes to the almost dozen Greenland Dialogue themes that we will have over the course of months and years ahead of us. Because they all are important to Greenland, but they're important to the Arctic. And if you think just in a U.S. perspective, what's important to the United States, I would argue that all of these issues related to Greenland are important to the Arctic, which is absolutely important to the future of the United States. These go hand in hand. So a number of things came up today related to research. So let me ask you a broader question before we get to other issues that I know we want to address. And those issues will be the very issues that were brought up and then tabled earlier today. But perhaps it would be very good, Minister, for you to give us a reflection on what you heard here today related to research, education, culture, outreach. It'd be nice to hear your thoughts.
Thank you. And I think today left us uplifted to see that developments are ongoing and the scientists from Greenland and US research communities are working together on these exact issues. Because we can do better by working together, considering more diverse perspectives as we conduct research, but also tell the benefit to the communities in Greenland and training the next generation on a collaborative framework. Because the panelists, firstly, I would like to thank the panelists to give us the insight and the knowledge of their work that they have, and thank you for those. We have to remind the society, and in both ways, that we need to work together towards education and towards research, and it is important for our communities to meet, and but also for the political leadership to show support and lead the way towards in-change cooperation.
Well, thank you for that. I think today obviously was a good step in that direction. I know that research and outreach has been happening in Greenland for a long time, at least with the United States, but today I heard something different. Today I heard a more strategic, a more step-by-step approach to what the future of Greenland research would be like, but also not people going out of their way, but highlighting the fact that Greenlanders, it's not they should be at the table, it is in fact Greenland's table. And Greenland should have a voice in what research is done, how it's applied, what the needs of the communities are, before researchers come in and research their landscape for whatever benefit the scientific community would like to have.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's very crucial that the scientific research done in Greenland goes and get benefits from the society for Greenland.
So let's hold that for a moment, because I know that there are some other questions. Let me try to
rephrase. Yeah. Rephrase the question.
I'll rephrase the question. The question is, it was clear to me today, and I'm asking if you agree, and it sounds like you do, so it might be a really quick answer to a very long question. If, in fact, you think there's been success in changing the way in which the scientific community thinks about research in Greenland, although researchers have, to their best heart, the best intentions. But it seems to me that this now has become a dialogue about what type of research is to be done, who gets to say what type of research gets to be done, and then who gets the data from the research and how that data is applied to Greenland versus researchers coming to Greenland, doing their research, and publishing in a paper.
Yes, it is important to let the science from the other countries to come to Greenland, to know that you have to interact with the communities with Greenland instead of going there and do the research and going out again and without angering the knowledge in Greenland. And that's why the Greenlandic Hub is a very good step towards that, to anchor the knowledge and the data in Greenland.
Thank you. Perhaps we can go to a broader subject or subjects, move away from research for a moment, and talk about some things that I know folks would like to talk about. So that's the broader geopolitical issues. I don't know if you heard, but Greenland has been in the news recently related to its geostrategic location, and let's just say its strategic real estate. And I wonder, joking included but aside, what that has done to Greenland these last few weeks, because it didn't come from nowhere, but it really was an avalanche of publicity and a spotlight on Greenland, not just for Greenland, but really for the Arctic as a whole, and with questions about everything from independence to economic development in the Arctic. So perhaps you can just give us your perspectives on what the last few weeks have been like, and then I want to talk about Greenland strategically, China, resource development, and other things.
Well, I think everyone in the world knows where Greenland is now, that's for sure. And we remain committed to develop our ties with the U.S., that we are committed, and that's why we say that we are open for business. And because Greenland is rich on valuable resources, we have fish stocks, fresh air. We can't sell fresh air, but purest water and ice, and fisheries, and resources, mineral resources. That's why, and the comment emphasizes the important strategic geographic place Greenland has, that emphasizes the importance of that to the world. We know that for many years, so we don't have to be reminded that we are a very geostrategic location in the Arctic. But yeah, I'll leave it that way.
Okay, good. Well, let's talk about the U.S. Greenland relationship then for a little bit. It seems to me that the response from the last couple of weeks have been, I think, great quote, which is we're not for sale, but we're certainly open for business. But there's been a re-emphasis in the relationship with the United States that is positive and would like to go forward. How do you see that relationship with the United States going forward, whether it be national security, economic development, et cetera?
Well, our work and effort as a government of Greenland is to improve the living conditions for our people and to raise the educational level, so we can get independence as the people in Greenland wishes. That's why we have to get economic independence before we can get full independence from Denmark. So, of course, the American military presence is a huge issue on that presence because what do you call it? Because the Greenlandic population and the political parties are very much engaged in that question about the military presence that should benefit Greenlandic society more than it has.
And geostrategically for the United States, obviously, Greenland is very important to us. But you also said that it's not just about having the U.S. presence there and the investment. It is about ways in which you can advance a workforce who is employed. Investments are made for education and research, perhaps drawing a straight line to the report we just talked all day about. So I don't want to put words in your mouth here, but strategically it works far more than the Air Force, the United States Air Force or the U.S. military. You're looking for this foundational support going forward versus perhaps other countries.
Yeah, well, we have to verify our economy to develop our society towards independence, and the American military presence should benefit the Greenlandic society in the greatest possible way, and that's why we are there. And as a friends and allies and close neighbors, we should work together on that issues, because when we continue to see the contracts in the military presence work that has, what do you call it, when we continue to see the civilian contracts works, go to American military, American-owned companies, that is, what do you call it?
You'd like to see those contracts go not just to U.S. companies, but
Yes.
maybe also Greenlandic companies
Yes,
to
yes.
invest in communities there.
Yes, because it's a delicate issue, but political, as a friends and allies, we should talk about this in a sensible way and come to a sensible agreement, because our priority as a Greenlandic population and government of Greenland is to get more beneficial of the military presence of another country.
I see. It's a good way of stating it. Well, I'm going to ask for you to think about questions here in the audience, but let me just follow that a little bit. We've talked about the military and military investment, which has been a long-standing relationship between the United States and Greenland. But what about other investment? What about other U.S. corporations who are looking to invest in perhaps Greenland's infrastructure or resource development? Because barring that, I understand, Greenland will entertain opportunities from other countries that may or may not have like-mindedness in terms of frameworks for international rule of law and other aspects of engagement. So perhaps you can talk a little bit about the ways in which Greenland is thinking about attracting venture capital, attracting resource and money to Greenland, and also what that looks like when people get concerned that some countries are very interested in investing in Greenland and perhaps other countries are not.
Well, there's an Pentagon's statement of intent last year that says that the investment in our infrastructure. Last November in Greenland, the parliament decided to build 3 airports, one in Qaqortoq, one in Nuuk, and one in Ilulissat. And the statement of intent from the Pentagon stated that they want to invest in dual-use infrastructure investment in Greenland.
So what about the last question, and then I will go to the audience for a couple of questions, because it won't be a big gala, but we'll have a reception afterwards. Now that Greenlandic galas have become sort of the thing here this afternoon. But what about the concern from many countries, including the United States, about investment from China, whether it's overt investment through Chinese companies or not covert investment, but investment through third parties, different companies that might be based in other countries. So what do you say to those who say you should not entertain opportunities from China or from Russia or from other countries that may not be allied with Greenland or the Kingdom of Denmark or NATO or the United States?
Well, I've said earlier that we have ongoing trade with China, and it is in the fisheries export we sell about $200 million worth of fisheries to China every year. So our main relation with China is fisheries. Of course, there have been interest. Like other open economy, we are interested in working with other countries, but we have to do the due diligence and the screening program with the Denmark to foreign investments in Greenland, because there's pitfalls that we should be focused on.
Thank you. So let me open it up to the audience for some questions before we head to our reception in about 10 or 15 minutes. Are there questions from the audience? I knew there would be at least several. Please here to my right. Thank you, Jack.
Hello, I'm John Baker, and I've come to many of these fine sessions that you have in the Greenland series. And I just wanted to say I was struck a little bit today that we have such deep knowledge here today with respect to Greenland, both from the representatives of Greenland, but also from the many Americans who are here. But what we seem to have is a great knowledge gap in terms of understanding and knowing about Greenland, particularly on the U.S. side. And I'm not sure whether you're intending that as part of your Polar Institute work and the Greenland Dialogues, but I hope that what will be coming out of all your work is some way that we have a way to convey a bit more information in ways that are accessible to more than all the experts who already know much about Greenland and will continue to know a great deal. So I hope on both sides that would be not just something that would be written by Americans, but written by Americans, Greenlanders, and also the important part of Denmark, because it's a three-way relationship.
Thank you. Do you want to respond to that or first, and then I will?
I'm not sure I understand it fully, obviously, because it's my third language. So I'm finding a little bit hard to grasp the words sometimes.
So maybe I'll try to sum that up, but then also respond. I think it's exactly, I think, the charge that Alice gave to us a few years ago, which is those of us who work with Greenland know, we know something of Greenland, not obviously all of it, cultural, linguistically, scientifically. But that's it. It's a small group. But Greenland's too big. It's too important in all aspects. It's just too important for the United States and the rest of the globe not to know about it. So I think I know the framing of the Greenland Dialogues, and Alice, I don't want to speak for you, was to do exactly what you are saying, is to get the word out that, well, there's a Greenland out there. Here's why you should care about it. Here's why it fits in the global Arctic. It's no longer this Arctic that is up there on the map. It's now a global Arctic. And how can we learn from and work with our colleagues in Greenland to better understand the environment, better understand Greenland, and how does that then permeate all of the work that we do, including public policy, whether it's domestic or international. The Greenland Dialogues is a foundation upon which we will do the work that you suggest. It is our vision that that is what happens. The second part of it is, and then Allison, maybe I can ask you to respond as well from the microphone from the floor. The second part is the agenda built today was not built by me or the Wilson Center. That was a collaborative agenda built, and we asked, what should we talk about here today in relation to research? What's the driving issues? And the driving issues are the National Science Foundation report, collaborative report, the next steps, how do we tease that out? And then we added our thoughts and concerns about the agenda. And I think that's the right model here. So going forward, we believe perhaps the next dialogue might be on economic development. We certainly eventually, with the minister's approval and great consultation, eventually we'll talk about steps toward independence, fisheries expansion, foreign investment from other countries. We'll do all of those things. but it is our intent to continue moving forward, and it is a part of what the Polar Institute at the Woodrow Wilson Center will do going forward. Alice, did you want to add anything to that at all? We have a microphone coming. And if you want to say anything on that.
Only to restate maybe in more base words the elegance with which you just said all that. And I would say we're trying to fill an ignorance gap here. And to our Greenlandic friends in the audience, we apologize for that ignorance. You're our neighbors, and we shouldn't be in this position, but here we are, we're trying. And I hope that as these dialogues go forward, we together with you, Greenland friends, frame these issues in the way that are most beneficial to all of us, rather than just to us on the receiving end in Washington, D.C.
And the more you interactively cooperate each other and speak to each other, the more we can understand each other, and that'll make the collaboration and cooperation easier. Yeah.
I think to take Alice's metaphor a little, take it forward a bit, it's not just about Greenland and an ignorance gap. It's Arctic and an ignorance gap. And so especially when I think about Alaska, my home, northern Canada, Greenland, Iceland, keep going, there is this gap. And if you take a look at the map that way, our needs are your needs. Infrastructure, economic development. What about communities that are threatened? How is climate change impacting X, Y, and Z? What's the energy regime going forward in the next 100 years? Is it diesel or is it renewables in microgrids? It's the same issues. And this is our way of embracing the northern perspective, but also a way of teasing out these very interesting issues and pressing issues of Greenland as well. We have time for maybe one or two more questions. To my left, and then we'll reserve the last one. If no one in the audience takes it, I will. We'll have one. Excellent. That somebody cut me right off. No more. Please, sir.
For Minister Bagger, so the airports may be moved in coming years. Should the role of existing airports in Greenland, such as in Kangerlussuaq, be reduced or eliminated, or should those be kept for international sort of long-haul flights? And if I can go for a second one, how much is Greenlandic used in education in Greenland? Does primary education also take place in Danish, or is that mostly at the university level? Thank you.
Thank you. About Kangerlussuaq, Sønderstrømfjord, there's a working group with the Danish Forsvarsminister, Defense Ministry, and Greenlandic Infrastructure Ministry, and Foreign Affairs Ministry. There's a work together to decide how the Kangerlussuaq should be used, because the defense of the military of Denmark has a wish to use Kangerlussuaq in the future, and that's why we are making an analysis about that. And about the education, well, the education, we're making a reform on the education, because the education level in Greenland is not where we want it to be, and the language that is spoken on schools is Greenlandic, Danish, and English. And the last numbers of the language that is that taught on the schools, that the English is improved to almost better than Danish now in the next generation. So it's they're better on that. So
thank you. And one last question here to my left.
My name is Bruce Gamble, and I'm not here with a question. I'm here with a statement, and it comes in the form of offering my personal, sincere, heartfelt thanks to your country for the contribution that you have made in the form of the rising sea level. And that is the melting of your ice sheets is contributing an invaluable resource to the betterment of our planet. That is, it's pure water going into what are becoming a highly acidic oceans and highly polluted oceans. And it's not only the purity of the water, it's also the chill that it's offering to help offset the heating of the water. And this heating is contributing to global warming and the demise of our planet. The rising of the ocean's levels is a huge inconvenience to all of us who are at the water's edge. But I'm in hopes that we can help mitigate this as humans in some way, that we can find a way. But in the meantime, please take back to your people that there are some of us who are deeply appreciative of this offering that you've given to the betterment of our planet. Thank you.
So let me just, Minister, thank you again for taking more than half of a day of your time while you're here in Washington, D.C. I'm sure there are other things you could have done, but you chose to spend it here with us this afternoon. So would you please thank the Minister for being with us today? And also, I want to thank all of the speakers and all those who put today together. Think of this as a foundational discussion from which we will now build other related discussions and continue on with these Greenland Dialogues. And thank you all here in the auditorium for being with us all afternoon. Those many online who have been watching and trying to get us questions that we've tried to incorporate in our narrative. I want to thank everybody there. And the reception will start momentarily just outside to the right as you leave the auditorium. Thank you once again for your time and attention.